Level up your LA Kings experience with Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access and rewards. Enjoy great seats to the game in Section 103 along with Yamava Club access and parking included with your purchase. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings shop item at the game. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn perks on each purchase from the only leading ticket company with a rewards program. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings. Did you know the LA Kings have their own culinary partner? It's Superfood, celebrating 10 years and over 1 million meals served. Since 2020, the Kings have trusted Superfood to fuel their players. Now through Simply Lunch, you can bring that same performance-driven food to your office. Because when people eat better, they work better. Visit mysuperfood.com. That's mysuperfd.com. Or call 213-973-6145. Qualified companies can enjoy a free lunch for up to 10 managers.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
Welcome back, Kings fans, to another episode of All the Kings Men. My name is Jesse Cohen, and joining us today from The Athletic, Scott Wheeler. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing well. You're catching me on the Friday before my first vacation in almost a year here. So
yeah, well, this is your busy
looking
time,
forward to being off. Looking forward to being off next week.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, we're going to keep you pretty busy today because we got 11 names to run down and featuring Zach Dooley. Zach Dooley, how are you doing?
Jesse, I was just saying it to you guys before we got on. This was a much easier episode back in 21 when the Kings made 4 picks and traded every pick after the 3rd round. So we had to do a little bit more work to get this one together.
Yeah, and speaking of which, I think we're just going to dive right into it because as Robert Frost would say, we've got miles to go before we sleep or rest, whatever. So, Scott,
before we vacation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we're just going to go through the players selected by the LA Kings in the 2026 NHL Entry Draft, and we're going to start in the first round with Elton Hermanson. Okay, Hermanson. Now you had him ranked 15th on your list.
Yeah, Elton's a player that I was high on. I felt that this was a 14-player draft, frankly, at the top, and those 14 players were pretty crystallized for me. But Elton was that next player at the front of that next tier, and from a skill standpoint, I felt had distinguished himself from his peers once the premium names were off the board. So he was one of my BPAs when they made that pick, BPA being best player available. I'm a big believer in the talent. The skill level is legit. Hermanson has had, I keep speaking about this draft class in present tense, had one of the better sets of hands in the class, had one of the better releases in this class, a lot of one-on-one to his game, a lot of trying to beat guys and make flashy plays. He's dynamic on the flank, on the power play, can create it 5-on-5 inside the offensive zone and off the rush. The criticism, if there was one, of Hermanson throughout the year was that he can come and go in games, as a lot of skill players do. There are ebbs and flows to his game. There are times when you want to see him work a little bit harder and be a little bit harder on pucks and take that extra stride or two to go win a battle. But from a pure skill standpoint, he was one of the only players taken in the second half of the first round who I think has a real chance to be a top 6 point producing power play type of player.
So you look at, Scott, the way that the Kings pool is kind of shaped. A lot of the things that you just said were not in the pool on a high end level, right? So is that, kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like the Kings added 11 guys, so they got their volume, but is this kind of like the cream of the crop? Like you got your quality here and maybe your quantity later kind of situation?
Yeah, and I just filled an area of need. Like I kept getting asked by Kings fans in advance of the draft, like, are they going to take a D? Are they going to take a winger? Are they going to take a center? What are our needs? And the answer was you kind of need everything. Like the pool just needed an injection of skill, and especially after trading Greentree, and we all like the 2 goalies, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun for Kings fans to now get to watch at the pro level Hampton Slukinski and Carter George. But if 2 of your better prospects are goalies, then there's some areas elsewhere in the pool that you need to address. And I think adding a skill guy, like a true skill guy up front in particular, especially after using last year's first-round pick on Bruce Davich, I think not that Brustevich eliminates the need to add D, but it prompted, I think, a little bit of the emphasis on, okay, let's find a high skill forward. And that's exactly what Hermansen represents.
He's not just high skill, but he's also high, I don't know what the right word I want to use here for is, but confidence, flash. Like, yep. He's not shy to show off.
There's a swagger.
Skill.
Yeah, for sure. There's a swagger to his game. He wants to break games open. He wants to make the big play. It's funny, he was criticized a little bit early on at U18 Worlds this year for his play and for not rising in the moment. And then in the quarterfinal, semifinal, and gold medal game, he was their best player, right? So there is an element of that to Elton. He's produced against men, which very few players in any draft class do pre-draft, obviously at the Hockey Allsvenskan level. I don't want to throw around this name too loosely, but his production and frankly where he was drafted were both comparable at the Hockey Allsvenskan level to David Pastrnak at the same age, and Pastrnak was described in a lot of the same ways. Now, Pastrnak became a 100-point player, and you're not expecting a 19th overall pick to necessarily become that, but that's kind of the identity, the DNA, sort of the makeup is that sort of Pastrnak type of player, a lot of confidence, and when the puck's on his stick, he wants to make a big play.
No, you said sorry, go ahead.
He's Zach. Not going to score a lot of garbage goals, I'll say that.
When you look at, you talk about the production against men, the Allsvenskan is the second tier in Sweden. Sweden, though, being, probably a top 3 European league at the top level. Where does the Allsvenskan rank when it compares to, like, okay, it's not the Swedish first division, maybe it's not the Finnish first division. Like, where does that kind of slot in the grand scheme of, like, European pro leagues?
I mean, it's the best of the second divisions. Like, it's better than the VHL, which is the second division in Russia. It's better than the SL, which is the second division in Switzerland. That it kind of fits into that second tier category, but it's a very, very strong second tier league, the strongest second tier league in Europe. I wouldn't say that it's far off of the Czech Extra Liga or the Slovak Extra Liga or even Liga, frankly, these days. Liga is a long way now from where it once was, Liga being the Finnish top division. Certainly the KHL and the SHL still stand above the rest, and then you've got the DEL, which is the German league, and the Swiss NL is spending a lot of money in attracting top players over there, and I think has surpassed the Finnish league, for example. But it's kind of in that second tier. Like it's more ECHL than AHL, for example, but it's a good pro league, and to score in at the Hockey Allsvenskan level at 17, 18 years old is not nothing.
So you described the players, ceiling and highs, but you talked about it as being a 14-player draft, which is a sort of random number to throw out there. So then, is the only thing holding Hermansen back from being in your top 2 tiers size and defensive, commitment, for lack of a better word?
I mean, the size isn't even an issue, really. Like, he's 6'1" and he's 180, 190 pounds. Like, the size piece of it's not an issue. I just think the one thing you would have liked to see is just a little more hardness, a little more competitive, a little more consistently involved off the puck. On the puck, he's a top-end talent in the age group. It's the rest of the game that still needs to sort of round into form at times.
All right. Well, like Zach said, the team needed skill, and it seems like, based on the handful of highlight reels that I watched, it seems like he is
no question.
oozing with that. Moving on to the second round, the first pick in the second round for the Kings, taken at 46th, a center, a right shot, same as Elton Hermansen, Liam Lefebvre. Now, his strengths are listed as size, shot, skating, and physicality. Under construction is listed, and I'm not sure that I wouldn't put this as a positive necessarily. Takes aggressiveness too far sometimes, but then also defensive game.
Yeah, and I think Lefebvre's going, despite the listing from NHL Central Scouting as a center, I think he's going to be a winger up levels, and was a winger in the QMJHL playoffs and into the Memorial Cup with Chicoutimi. But really, really interesting story this year. One of the top overagers, obviously one of the first overagers picked, and really came into his own among the group of players who traveled north into the CHL last year, now that college eligibility is open to CHL players, and Lefebvre was one of those kids that came north and was impactful, and not just impactful, but played on the first line of a Memorial Cup team, a QMJHL championship team, right? So big, strong NHL shot, extremely physical, plays with a hardness to his game, has clear path, I think, to becoming a fourth line NHL player. Like, that's what you're hoping that Lefebvre as a second round pick becomes. And that's a successful second round pick if that's what he becomes. The pace at times, and the playmaking at times, you want to see him tunnel vision maybe a little bit less, but he's got the physical attributes. He's got the physical sort of competitiveness and physical edge to his game. And the shot is legit. Like, he's gotten an NHL caliber shot.
When his path is super interesting to me, you don't see very many kids go from Montreal to US prep, then to the QMJHL. Is that maybe more a product of the changes to eligibility with the CHL and the NCAA, and maybe something you might see more of? And I guess to follow up on that, did that make his evaluation maybe a little bit trickier because he bounced around with those kind of strange levels, and then he was an overage player in the QMJHL this year?
Yeah, it made it a complicated evaluation, but by the end of the year, he was so good for such a good team and such a big part of that team that everything else kind of faded away a little bit. And his status is kind of a top 2 or 3 rounds guy. Obviously, they take him in the middle of the second round, I believe it was. I think he was taken in the late 40s, but he was kind of in that 45 to 75 range. Like, that was just where he was expected to go. And if they didn't take him there, it's not as though they were sort of jumping up and taking this overage kid that everybody was maybe a little bit lower on. Like, he was going to go in those next several dozen whatever picks. And it's because of the attributes, it's because of the size, it's because he just has a pro look to him as sort of a potential bottom 6 checking physical player who can maybe contribute a little bit because of the shot offensively. So certainly part of it, and to answer your first question, that it's going to become a trend. He's going to be the first of many, and there were several other players, frankly, in this draft class that also did that. Tommy Blyle was a first round pick. Like, there were multiple kids who played whether prep school in the US or USHL in the US who traveled north. Certainly the CHL obviously also lost kids in Gavin McKenna and Keaton Verhoff and Adam Valentini and others to college hockey. But there was a counterflow that happened, and that's going to continue to happen here into the CHL as well. A lot of these kids want to be playing their draft year in the CHL. They get more eyeballs, and it benefited Lefebvre at the end of the year to have made that move to the Q and to have played on a top team, and certainly playing on a winning team never hurts either.
2 quick questions, Scott. It sounds like you're putting his ceiling at bottom 6 wing.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's an overager. It's not unheard of for a 19-year-old to be drafted even in the first round sometimes. But if a 19-year-old is taken in the second round, we have heard, Zach and I, that increases the likelihood of that player hitting. That, like, the percentages of guys taken in the first round to make it in the NHL, I'm just going to make up a number, is 50%, and then it drops down subsequently each round. Do you get a bump in that percentage by taking a 19-year-old?
I don't know whether that's necessarily the case. Like, I don't know whether his odds are any greater than the kid who I'm sure we're about to get to, in Adam Golier, who they took 3 or 4 picks later, I believe. I would probably set their odds at about equal to each other. I think they're comparable prospects to each other, regardless of the age piece. Certainly, you have more data. You have a longer sort of track record of success in many cases if they're an overager. But part of the reason they weren't picked the first time is sometimes because that data was thin. So I don't know. I'm not sure I subscribe to the belief that you're getting a sure thing in an overager. Sometimes they're just late bloomers. Sometimes they had a growth spurt. Matthias Vannanen wasn't picked by the Kings, but another overager in last year's draft. Like, he was 5'8" in his draft year, and then he was 5'10" when he got picked, and those 2 inches made a big difference. He was just later to grow than most of his peers at 17, 18 years old. I don't know whether him having done it at 19 necessarily puts him further ahead. Like all of those kids are going to do what he did this year. A lot of the kids who were picked in that range are going to just do it next year. And they're just a year behind in terms of what their path looks like. So we'll see. But I mean, certainly it helps from a proximity standpoint. Like I don't know whether his odds are higher, but he's a year closer, right? So if you care about timeline, if you care about potentially slotting him in the next few years, he just is naturally a little bit further along. He's certainly, in his case, more physically developed. That's not always the case for overagers, but with Lefebvre, like you see him around the rink, you shake his hand. He's a big, strong kid, so he's more mature that way. And now we'll see. He's going to take the college route and spend a couple of years, and we'll see where that sort of lands him.
So you mentioned the player. Sorry, go ahead, Zach.
Just Scott, when I've read, kind of what you've written about him and hearing what you said about him, it's such an interesting mix of skills because you have like the hardness and the physicality to his game, but also the shot is always included as well. Not the playmaking, but the shot. And oftentimes I feel like when you look at like bottom of the lineup players, you see stat lines that are more like 10 plus 20 rather than like 20 plus 10. Mm-hmm. And I'm just making up numbers here. Does he strike you as the kind of guy who maybe his goal number shot surprises you a little if he hits, but it's not going to have, that standard deviation of points for the role that he plays?
Yeah, I think that's possible. It's possible that he becomes more of a scorer than that his totals, let's say, scores 15 to 20 goals a year, and he has 10 or 15 assists in his assist totals. Okay. And he's a 35-point player, but his assist totals are maybe a tick below the goal totals. That would not surprise me here.
All right, Scott, we're going to go to the player that you mentioned previously, Adam Gollier, taken 49th overall. This is a 6'3" right shot defenseman who you had ranked 41st. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I want to spend a little bit of extra time on this kid because not only do you have him ranked in your top 50, but I saw a lot of positive ink spilled about this guy. And when I watched the highlight reels, it's sort of undeniable what this kid can do. Now it's highlight reels, so it's obviously going to show off the good parts, but.
Yeah, Gollier's a really, really interesting kid. Another kid who is physically a little bit further ahead than his peers. Like he's just a thick, strong, athletic, sort of bulky kid. He's already added a lot of muscle to his frame, and he's a great athlete. Like I remember looking back at some of the data that's tracked at the World Juniors, and he was one of the fastest skaters at last year's World Juniors, for example, or at least clocked one of the highest speeds at last year's World Juniors. So he's got these physical attributes, and then he kind of plays to those attributes. He plays a bit of a commanding game. I wouldn't say he's the most cerebral defenseman, but he's one of those guys who just plays firm, plays on instincts, takes his space. He can beat the first layer and then attack into his shot. He's got a legit shot. He'll step up and play the body. He'll battle in front of the net and box out and win his battles in the corners. And his first pass is crisp, and there's just it's hard to describe, but there's just a real firmness to his game. Like there's just almost an assuredness to his game, a confidence to his game. Everything is sort of pro habits. He's obviously played professional hockey already, was very, very good on a Slovak team that actually won a silver medal at U18 Worlds and was one of the stories of this year's sort of U18 World Championship. He was excellent there, played big minutes for them in all situations. I'm not sure whether he's going to run a power play or be even a first penalty kill guy, but he's the kind of player who you can sort of look at and say, okay, this kid's got a real path to being a top 6 defenseman in the league who's a solid two-way, even strength guy and maybe chips in where you need him on your special teams.
Everything that I'm hearing is kind of like it's almost like how do you differentiate between like a jack of all trades versus like a master of none type? Like he's not clearly towards the power play. He's maybe not your first penalty killer over the boards, but you also could see him in those roles too at the back end. How does that evaluation process go for a guy like that?
Well, I think when you're a second round pick, you typically don't have the guys with the truly defining traits. Mm-hmm. Are first round picks, or you've got a guy who, if he's a second round pick and he's got one of those truly defining traits, there's got to be a flaw a major red flag in there as well for that player to be available in the second round. And then you get into the second round, and there's always a cluster of 5 or 60 who just look like players, or 5 or 6 forwards who just look like they're going to be players. And I think Golier and Lefebvre kind of fit into that same realm. Like, are they going to be top of the lineup guys? Not likely. Is there a real path for them to be a top 12 forward or a top 6 defenseman in the NHL? I think the answer is yes. And that's good. Like, if you turn both of those into players for you, that's good value. Like, that's a successful second round when you've got 2 picks. I believe they were both picks in the 40s, right? So it's not even as though these were a 33rd or a 34th or a 35th overall pick. Like, these were mid second rounders, and they look like they've got a real chance.
He plays for Trenčín Dukla, which is, in the the Slovak League, I believe. Yep. Now, according to what I've read, he played over 20 minutes a night in that league at 17. How good is that league? How impressed should we be that he's able to log those minutes as a teenager against professional adults?
It's a weaker pro league, but I wouldn't call it a poor one. We've seen some guys come out of the Latvian league and the Norwegian league recently, and those are much lower level than the Slovak league, for example. But it's a decent below average European pro level. It is still respectable when you're a good player at that level. Typically, the top 4 or 5 guys from the country in an age group will play at that level. Maybe not 4 or 5. The top 2 to 4 guys from an age group, so this is the 2008 age group, the top 2 or 4 08s would typically play in that league rather than play junior, or they would come over through the import draft and play in the CHL. That's kind of been the path for the top Slovak kids. Obviously, you have guys like Juraj Slavkovsky that went to play elsewhere. Slavkovsky played in Finland in his draft year and a little bit in advance of his draft year, but by and large, Simon Nemec obviously is the big recent one. Who stayed and played there, and there are a handful of good teams as well. Like, there's a difference between the league level and the team level, and Dukla Trenčín is frankly a historic club, one of the historic clubs in all of Europe. They've got an amazing old barn and a loyal fan base, and they're a successful team every year. And so playing for Trenčín is also different than playing for some of the other teams in the Slovak Extraliga, but he's a good player. Like, he's just a good player, and it's a decent league.
Scott, a lot of times when you see these guys come from the European pro leagues, they play a different game and a different role at the senior level than they do against their peers. Like, I look at Wojtek Sihar, right? He was a bottom 6 player in Czechia, but then at the World Juniors, he's a first line offensive player. Like, how did Golzer's game differ, if at all, like playing in the role he played in Slovakia versus when he went to U18s and U20s? Like, did he play the same game just more impactfully, or did he change it all?
No, he was more active, more involved. He ran PP1, so he's at the top of the umbrella. That's not the role that he played on Trenčín. Obviously at U18 Worlds, he's a go-to guy in that kind of a role. But he just played a more confident, more challenging, more aggressive game. Took more risks. That was a big part of his U18 Worlds, was just showing that he could really command when he was out there, rather than just trying to sort of play smart and earn the trust of your coach. And he's always had, frankly, a little bit of risk. Like, he likes to step up, he likes to attack. That's been a part of his game. But you just see it more when he's playing against his peers.
Moving on then into the third round, this player actually was drafted precisely where you had him in your rankings. We're talking about Blake Zielinski, another center, another right shot player, taken 80th overall. Strength listed as 200-foot game, elite playmaker, unselfish player, snipe and accurate wrist shot, net front presence, elite hands in tight, playing off the puck and positioning, under construction, strength and skating and pace, creativity at times can be a little bit predictable in shot selection, but you had him in your top 100.
Yeah, Zielinski's a solid player. I'm not sure whether I would use some of the elite terms that were tossed around in that report, but he's he's just a very, very solid, well-rounded hockey player. He made the difficult decision to stay in the USHL while some kids were leaving for the CHL last year, and he had an opportunity to go and play for the Ottawa 67s. He made the decision to stay, and he play out his draft year there. He was excellent last summer, almost a year ago now, at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup for USA Hockey as a big part of their top line with Jack Hextall, who was a first-round pick. He's and Nikita Klepov, actually, who was another first-round pick. He was an important part of that line, didn't look out of place playing with those players. Then he goes to the USHL. He got off to a bit of a slow start, but picked it back up. Above average tools kind of across the board, and then he works, and he's kind of the classic Providence player. Like Providence College has a clear type that they recruit. They like the hardworking, pro style, competitive, well-rounded player, and they've never been able to get the true premium skill guys, so they've really honed in on just building a culture and an identity amongst the players that they recruit. And Zielinski's one of those kids who just kind of fits that identity. Like, he's just a very likable player. I do wonder a little bit if he might top out as like a good AHL second liner, and whether there's going to ever be enough offense for him to be a no doubt 82 games a year NHLer. But I have similar questions about almost every player taken in the third or fourth round, right? So I thought he belonged in that sort of range, that third round range. And now you just hope that he becomes a really good player at Providence, which I think he will be, and that he earns an entry-level contract, which I think he's got a real chance to do. And then you go from there.
He strikes me as the kind of guy who does things that coaches like he's that guy on the team who does those little things that like makes a coach trust him and want to play him more, and maybe put him in situations above higher skilled players because he does things that coaches like. Do you see those things when you watch his game?
Yeah, no question. Like, he's just a consistent shift to shift, game to game player. Like, he's not a player that people would have showed up in the USHL rinks last year and showed up to, if NHL scouts were showing up to watch him play. He's not a kid that they would have left the rink saying, I hated that kid's game tonight, or he was soft, or he was undisciplined, or he was cheating for offense. Like, that's just not a takeaway that his game would ever produce for you. Maybe he doesn't wow you, but he's going to be a consistent contributor to your team, and has kind of been that at the USHL level at a very high level, frankly, over the last 2 years. He was actually excellent as a 16-year-old as well at that level. So, and it's a hard league to score in. Like, the kids who play there don't have the counting stats that you see in the CHL. Like, it's just a lower scoring league. So I think that's a part of it as well.
You mentioned that he's going to Providence. Does he become part of this experiment that we're seeing right now of players starting out in major juniors and then moving to the NCAA?
Yeah, it's certainly it's becoming more and more of that what you're describing is becoming more and more the path for a lot of kids. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of kids who, instead of going in at 18 to college hockey, are choosing to either spend their pre-draft seasons in the USHL or CHL, maybe make the jump post-draft to play a year in the CHL and really build your confidence, and maybe point and be a part of a league that's loaded with, like, whether it's the OHL or the WHL, that's loaded with first and second round picks. And then you make the jump a year later at 19 college hockey, and you're that much closer to being ready to make an impact in college hockey. And you're not having to sort of spend a year playing 10 or 11 or 12 minutes in the NCAA as an 18-year-old freshman who maybe wasn't ready. Instead of doing that, you can go and play 18 minutes a night as a top six, in Zielinski's case, as a top six center in junior, right? So I think we're increasingly going to see that be the pathway for a lot of kids.
And I guess that being said, like we talked to him at development camp, like this year, like he's going to go and play in college is his plan for next year. Like what can we expect from him as he makes that jump? And is he the kind of guy who you kind of just want to see that steady progression over a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years in college, before you get a sense of like how kind of pro ready he might be at 20, 21 down the road?
Yeah, he's not going to be a one and done or even a two and done player. Like, you're looking at a 3 or 4 year college player here, and that's kind of the standard for a player picked in that range, and that gets him out of college at 21 or 22, and then hopefully you spend a year or two in the AHL, and in your early to mid 20s, you're starting to put yourself in the NHL call-up conversation, and you're in the mix in training camp, and you're a real option, a real depth option.
The next player taken also in the third round, 89th overall. And this one, Scott, even though I had point blank asked Mark Yannetti, I assumed they would not take a goalie because of the depth in the goalie prospect, but He assured me that was not their position, that if the right goalie was available at the right time, they would. So, of course, we're talking about Igor Rybkin, who, listen, it's one thing to tell you that a guy is 6'6" or 6'7". It's another thing to see them on the ice, and it's another thing when they're out there in goalie pads. We saw this kid at development camp, and he's just massive. I mean, he's just huge, which is all of his strengths and all of his weaknesses. This kid is enormous.
Yeah, and he didn't play like the story of Igor's season last year was that he dealt, I believe it was, don't quote me on this, but I believe he had a herniated disc, and so he dealt with some injury issues, and I don't know whether he ended up having surgery on it. I've got that in my notes somewhere, but he just didn't play a ton of games. And so you're really counting on a long runway here. The Russian goalies typically stay and spend, unless they come over and play in the CHL through the import draft process, a lot of them typically stay and play even like 5-6 years post-draft in Russia, and then come over here in their sort of early to mid-20s. And very different than Slukinski and George, right? Like Slukinski's 6'1", George is 6 foot on a good day. So a different type of goalie that they're choosing to work with here. Doesn't have maybe the quick feet and the quick dexterity and hands that a goalie like a Carter George or a Hampton Slukinski has. But you're counting on him being more of a blocking goalie. He still moves and quite well and is a good athlete. And you're just betting on that upside long term here. And you can afford to, because in the meantime, you've got two young goalies. You've got Eric Portillo. Like, you've got guys who can sort of bridge a potential gap for a goalie like Rybkin.
The Kings hit a point probably, Jesse, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, where the goalie pipeline was basically nothing. Like, they had Jonathan Quick in the NHL for so many years, and they almost didn't draft enough goalies. Now they kind of have this age distribution. Like, Portillo is at an AHL level pushing to maybe be an NHL number 2. And then now you have at 20, Slukinski, George, and now you have Rybkin at 18. Is that kind of, and sorry, Petteri Rimponen in the middle. So you have now kind of options, and you have an age distribution with these guys. Is that worth, spending these mid-round picks on to be able to have, so that you don't find yourself in that position long-term?
Absolutely. If you're a team like the Kings were this year with 11 picks, I love annually using a third or fourth round pick on a goalie, and then letting the cards fall where they may. You take enough goalies, you're going to find one who's decent, who's good, who can play for you, right? So that's kind of what they've done over the last 3 or 4 drafts here, and I think it's an approach that a lot of, frankly, more teams should adopt. There are teams that do. There are several teams around the league that will literally take a goalie a year. They go to their goalie scout and they say, find us a goalie and tell us what range you want to take them, and that's your pick. And that the goalie scout gets a pick every year. And I think it's the right approach. It's tricky. Obviously, if you're a first round pick, and there have been some in recent years, obviously if you're the sort of Sebastian Kosa or Jesper Wallstedt, who's a clear cut elite goalie at an early age, then that's a different calculus in the first round. But there's not a lot of risk to taking a goalie, frankly, with a third or fourth round pick. And sometimes they become real players for you.
Yeah, Scott, you mentioned, the timeline on Russian goalies. We've heard from Igor Rybkin that he will be playing for Moncton. He was taken in the import draft, 5 days after the NHL entry draft. Does that improve the quality of this pick at all, that he's already committed to coming over to North America and has a place to play?
You're certainly happy about it if you're the Kings. You're happy that not only he's coming over and getting acquainted to angles on North American ice and sort of just North American culture, learning the language. A lot of the Russian kids, it takes them a long time to just get comfortable over here. So that's positive. Getting these kids over here earlier is always preferable, I think, for NHL clubs than leaving them in the KHL, even though the KHL and VHL and MHL have an excellent track record, maybe the best track record on planet Earth of developing goalies. I think your preference would always be to have them closer to your organization, to be able to send your goalie coach more regularly out to see him play and to work with him on the ice. And I'm sure the Kings will do that with him over the course of the next 2 seasons, which I would expect he'll play both of the next 2 seasons in Moncton. And then on top of it, Moncton is an excellent organization. Taylor and Gardner McDougall, who run the Moncton Wildcats, have quickly in the last couple of years turned it into a perennial contender, and they want to win every year. And it's a great facility, one of the best arenas in the CHL, frankly, from a financial backing standpoint, ownership standpoint. The Irving family, who owns the Moncton Wildcats, they're basically oil barons here in Canada. So there's a lot of positives to him coming over here, and him coming over here specifically and playing in Moncton.
Excellent. Well, listen, I can think of 3 franchises that have fumbled unbelievable goalie depth in the last, 15, 20 years, but hopefully the Kings do the trick of drafting all the running backs in your fantasy football league and then trading them away when everybody else in the league needs one. Next on the list is the player that I think I'm most maybe I don't know about most fascinated by, but the fact that the Kings traded up in the draft to acquire Thomas Vandenberg, a center, left shot, played for the Ottawa 67s. He's 103rd overall in the 4th round, but again, to me, it's just the curiosity that the Kings traded into that spot. They didn't hold that pick. They were slated to pick at 113th, I think, Zach. And then that draft pick came around, and all of a sudden they were jumping up. That suggests to me that there's something about Thomas Vandenberg that they really like, although it had been suggested to me by somebody else that maybe he was just the end of a tier. So do you see him more as a specific target, Scott, or as the last player in an available tier that maybe the Kings wanted to move into?
No, he felt like a specific target to me there. Vandenberg's a player, obviously, who I had firmly in my top 100 and at times even in my top 64 throughout the draft process. So obviously I'm a fan of the pick at 103. Another kid who took that USHL back to the CHL path was good, not great at U18 Worlds for Canada. I thought he was excellent in the first 3 or 4 games of the tournament and then had a bit of a tougher time in the medal round. But he's just a worker. He's an average size center, so you do wonder a little bit about, okay, he's a 5'11", 6 foot center who doesn't have like that high-end skill, and oftentimes lower in a lineup if you're going to be a natural centerman. Teams are just partial to the 6'3" heavy guy. But he works, and that's the defining quality of Vandenberg's game, and frankly in the same way that it is Zielinski's, and maybe even to a higher degree in Vandenberg's game. Like, his feet are always moving, he's always chasing and hunting pucks, he always wants to win his races, he gets up and under sticks, and he's a smart player. Like, on the puck, he's there, despite the fact that he's not a dynamic skill guy and he doesn't have that sort of blistering wrist shot or one-timer or that one sort of defining power play quality to his game. He just works, and he's around the puck all game, and good things happen, and he was an excellent player for the 67s last year as a rookie in the league, and he's just a solid, hard-working player who, even if he doesn't become an NHL player, I think is the kind of player that you want on your AHL team. He's the kind of player that you want in your culture. He's the kind of player that you want as a depth option, because if he is a call-up for you and you do run into injuries, and maybe he's not your top 12 forwards, but maybe he's forward 15 or 16, and at some point over the course of the season you need him, you know exactly what you're going to get in Vandenberg, and that's a kid who is just going to go out and work and move and be active and be involved. And there is something to that. And I think he's one of the only sort of 4th round and on picks who's got an actual chance to play.
He's kind of the opposite of what we talked about in like a Liam Lefebvre or a couple of these other guys, in that he was one of the youngest players in the draft. Like, he's still 17. He hasn't even hit September 18 birthday. Years old, right? So how does that change the evaluation too, where he's in the same league as certain guys? He's over a year younger than, a lot of the peers that he's being compared to.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a part of it. You have to couch in some upward development, and maybe he hasn't grown in that extra inch that's coming. Maybe all these kids have that extra inch, and his is still coming, right? And that takes him from 6 foot to 6'1", and he's a good skater, and he's got sort of pieces of the puzzle. Maybe the skill really comes. We do often see that with those sort of July, August, September birthdays in a draft class. We often see those kids take like a noticeable step relative to their peers, like a more pronounced step post-draft. I think back on Nick Robertson, who was a second-round pick of the Leafs. He just comes to mind because he was one of those kids who just September birthday on the younger side of his draft class, and then he takes a huge step post-draft because he's just catching up, right? It's that extra little bit of runway that he's now running into. So I think it's a real part of the calculus, I'm sure, and why they liked him. He has that foundation of work ethic, and then maybe there's more of something else that's going to come here just because he is on the younger side.
For such a young player, he will have racked up a lot of experience in different leagues. He starts out in the USHL, then he goes to the CHL, he gets World Juniors experience, now he's off to the NCAA. Does that help to have a young player who's traversed all those levels of the hockey world as a prospect?
Yeah, it's good to get the international cup of coffee that he got at U18 Worlds and to be a part of that team. That was a disappointing result this year in Slovakia for Team Canada, but he'll learn something from that. And I think especially those, as I mentioned off the top, those sort of early games, he was really good and was sort of moved up the lineup even, and all of those things just to show himself, frankly, where he's at amongst his peers. Are valuable, and where he's at amongst his peers now may be different than where he's at amongst his peers 5 years from now, but he's been tested at different levels and he's passed some of those tests.
In your post-draft recap, you kind of said, hey, he's very similar in a lot of ways to Zelensky. Yep. In terms of kind of that all well-rounded kind of approach. Is he another guy who you see as a good fit at Providence, with that same kind of track record where he's going next year?
Yeah, I mean, Nate Lehman's the head coach there, and I would say that Vandenberg is even more of a Nate Lehman type of player than Zelensky is, and I think Zelensky's exactly what Lehman and his staff are looking for. So he'll fit right into everything that the Friars are trying to do.
You had him at 55, and he was taken at 103. So hopefully we'll see him perform closer to that 55 ranking. Moving on then to the 5th round. We get a pair of defensemen. We're going to start with the left shot, Verdi Svensk, taken 145th overall. Now, I hate to mention one of your competitors. I don't know if it's competitors, but Will Scouch was incredibly high on Verdi Svensk. He was also taken in the import draft. Unclear if he will come over and play in North America this coming season, but played in Liga, a league that you have and many have identified as sort of taking a step back. But 6'1", 168 pounds. I talked to him at Dev Camp. He's on the slight side, but apparently oozing with talent.
Yeah, the skating is what defines Svensk's game. He's a late 07, so he was on the older side of this draft class, and you do start to wonder, okay, if he's on the older side and he still has an added weight, maybe there's a bit of maybe his metabolism's maybe working against him, and that is just the reality for some players. Like some players, it's just hard to even add 2, 3, 4 pounds, let alone that 15 or 20 that a player like Spence will need to add in order to play in the NHL. And it can just take time, and it takes a different diet, and it just takes really, really investing in getting into the gym and eating a lot. And then there's still kids who just burn through it. Like there's a lot of hockey players around the league, including Connor McDavid is a huge example of this, but a lot of guys who just stay lean, and that's just their body type. But he has the mobility and he's competitive, frankly, as well. Like he likes to take space, and he likes to play in bumps, and he likes to battle. Like that's a big part of his game. And then on top of it, he has the feet. And if you're a great to excellent skater, which I would qualify Svensk as, that's a word that in and of itself, I think makes you a worthy late round pick. Like if you can skate, you're already further along than a lot of the kids who were picked in the 5th, 6th, and 7th round, right? So, that kept him on my list all year. Is just the mobility. Like he's got great feet.
He strikes me as being different than most players picked in this range because he does have that one really high level trait versus a lot of guys who, like you said, have maybe fewer. They're more well rounded, but they don't have that standout skill. Like, why? I guess I'll ask the more negative question. Like, why was he available in the 5th round? Like, what are the parts of his game minus the size that he needs to add to become more of a pro guy?
I think it's the size. Like, it's hard to be 6 feet and 160 something pounds. If you were to go on to NHL.com right now and sort the number of NHL defensemen who played under 178 pounds even last year in the league, it's probably 4 or 5 guys. So the odds are just long by default of his makeup. Now, if he can get stronger and add some weight, I think he's got a chance. Even if that doesn't come, he might still have a chance with the mobility. We just saw Thomas Galvis, who's actually a player he kind of reminds me of. Galvis was passed over 3 times in the NHL draft. Well, 2 times, picked in his third and final crack at the NHL draft by the Pittsburgh Penguins, and was just signed to his entry-level contract. And the knock against Galvis was similar, 6 foot and really skinny. And it's hard to trust that a 6 foot, skinny, lean kid is going to make it in the NHL, especially as a defenseman. It's easier as a forward. And yet Galvis, just with the skating and the mobility and just continuing to do it and do it and do it at the pro level, he just made it impossible for himself not to be a pick. And Svensk, frankly, did that earlier than Galvis because Galvis was passed up twice and Svensk wasn't. But there are some lines to draw there. Like, Galvis became one of the top defensemen in the Czech Republic at their top pro level last year and was a star at the World Juniors. So Svensk will need to do that like Galvis did in order to earn his entry-level contract. But that's what you're hoping. You're hoping that next year at the World Juniors, he's going to be a big part of it for the Finnish national team, that he's going to be have a good year, whether that's at the pro level or he comes over here and plays in the CHL. And then you sort of go from there with a player like him. But it's just about those kids. They maybe just have to prove it a little bit more. They have to show people that extra year of success, that extra level of success before teams really buy in and give them an entry-level contract or that kind of a thing.
It's funny. We spend so much time hyper-focusing on height, and it's rare that the weight and the strength gets discussed, right? Like, height has just sort of become shorthand for size, whereas you got a player like, and I'm just going to use this player because he's come up in recent conversations, a guy like Tyler Madden, who had all the grit and the try hard and the effort and skill,
even the skill,
but unfortunately just not big enough. And, had he been 40 pounds heavier at his height, maybe he could have overcome it. But unfortunately, just...
Well, and then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got Logan Stankoven, who's 5'8", and he's built like an ox, right?
Right.
And he's thick, and that can be the difference maker, regardless of the 5'8" listing.
Any short player who makes it, you can almost be guaranteed to find somebody comparing them to a fire hydrant.
Yeah,
right? Like that's just the shorthand for
you're Johnny Gaudreau and you're just
right.
You're too skilled to
thighs like tree trunks or fire hydrant will be the two comparisons. So the next defenseman taken in the 5th round is the player that I think I might be most fascinated by, Scott, and that is Georgios Pantelis, Gio Pantelis, right shot defenseman, 153rd overall, 5th round pick. 6'2", 214 pounds. And Scott, the thing that fascinates me about this kid is so as soon as all the picks were made, I went ahead and I started trying to find highlight reels and read up as much as I could about the different players. And every interview I saw about this kid, every statement I read about this kid was needs to work on the offensive side of the puck, but his bread and butter is defense. He's sound defensively. And then I would watch the highlight reels and I see him whipping the puck around the offensive zone like he's Elton Hermanson. So I was very confused because I was like, all right, if this is a 6'2", 214 kid sized defenseman who's, I think I saw one comparison to Matt Green. And I was like, all right, I never saw Matt Green move the puck in the offensive zone with any kind of confidence, but no disrespect to Matt Green. He's a great player, but like an offensive defenseman, he was not.
Yeah, Pantless. Have you guys spoken to him? That's going to be my first.
I have, yes.
Question.
I love the kid so
Jesse
much.
did, yeah.
So that's the first thing. Like when I think of Gio, that's the very first thing I think of is he is a delight, and he doesn't talk like most he doesn't talk like most hockey players do. Yeah. I think he's comfortable in his skin. I think he's a bit of a nerd, and he's happy to be a nerd, and he's just different.
Self-aware is a phrase I would use.
Yeah, he's different than your average hockey player. He's engaging. Mm-hmm. I think fans, whether he makes it or not, maybe he's just a part of the AHL team long term. I think fans are really going to just like the kid. His coaches are going to like him. He works hard by all accounts from the conversations I've had with people around him. And then he's just a really smart intellectual kid, which I'm always fascinated by. As a player, he has the physical tools. He's a good skater. He defends well. All of those things are true. He does make a lot of mistakes on the puck, and you won't see that in the highlight reel per se, but he, over the course of a game, the one thing that sort of held Pantelis back over the course of this season and frustrated scouts at times and was really on display at the CHL USA Prospects Challenge in Calgary and Lethbridge back in November of last year, was just under pressure. He doesn't always read it well. He can turn over some pucks. He can be a little sloppy with the puck at times. And so people start to wonder, okay, the defending is real. We like the kid. The size and frame we can work with. Is he going to be able to move pucks well enough was kind of the question. I still believed, and he was in my top 100. So again, another pick. I liked the Kings' draft. The Kings were one of my winners of the draft, but he's a kid that I thought deserved to be more of a third or fourth round pick than a fifth round pick where he was. But there were also, in speaking with some scouts, like there were some scouts who not gave up on him, but some scouts who maybe liked him a year ago when he was playing at U17 Worlds and he had a good 16-year-old season in Brandon, and then just saw him this year and saw him make a few too many mistakes at times with the puck on his stick under pressure. And they sort of really softened on him. So he was a kid who just maybe didn't trend in the right direction for everybody. But I still think he's absolutely a worthwhile pick where they took him in the fifth round. And I love the kid, and he does defend well, and he's big and he's strong and he can skate, and that's halfway there, right? So
I hear a lot of the tools that you can't teach and the weaknesses being tools that maybe teams feel they can teach. Is that kind of the case here where you have this athlete who is an athlete worthy of developing, and you have to add some of the finer kind of touches to his game?
Yeah, and sometimes that just comes with, sometimes kids never get the hands and never get sort of the decision-making reads part in their own zone. Sometimes that does never come. But sometimes it does, and it just takes reps and time, and especially with defensemen, frankly, sometimes it just takes reps and time and playing more minutes and being on the ice in more of those situations to sort of figure out what works within your game and what your identity as a player is. And I think Gio's a kid who, if he finds that identity and really leans into it, I think he's got a chance. And there aren't a lot of kids taken from 150 onward that I would say have a chance, and he's one of them.
Does it help that the Kings have Matt Green and Sean O'Donnell as their development coaches on the defensive side?
Certainly. Yep.
All right. Moving on to the sixth round, and this is a player, this one caught me by surprise. He's 20 years old, Alex Kostov, 6'4", 207 pounds. So obviously size not a concern with Alex. But third-year draft eligible.
Yep.
What does that say about it? Like, my first thought when I see a player, okay, he's not 1 year through, he's 2 years through.
Yeah.
He should be doing well if he's that much older than the competition.
Yeah, and Kostov's an interesting one. Like, he wasn't in my top 100, but he was really close. And I mentioned in my honorable mentions and in my overage ranking of overagers and ahead of the class, like I mentioned that he was like, he would have been if it was the top 120, he would have been on my list. So again, to get him in the 170s, I like the pick. I think he's an interesting player. He went to a couple of development camps. Like, he's been at a couple prior to the Kings selecting him. Had already been to a couple of NHL development camps, and was a very, very, very good player in Flint. He's rangy. Like he's also a bit of a leaner kid, but he's rangy and he's kind of got some natural.
So I'm going
muscle
to
and
jump
some
in. I'm going to
natural
ask you
strength.
to. Sorry, Scott. I'm going to ask you to define rangy. I think I know what you mean, but I'm going to ask you to.
Like long stick,
Okay.
long legs, long arms. Like he's just got that sort of look, that lengthy look to him, and a bit of a leaner kid as well. But noticeable with the puck on his stick, can shoot it, can handle it, works hard. There are some tools there. I think he's a better skater, frankly, than some people gave him credit. Like I heard people talk about his skating as an issue, and I've never seen that with Alex. Like I actually think he's a good skater, and I've seen him make plenty of plays off the rush and pull away from guys at times and all that. So an interesting player. Like just I think he's got a you don't take a 20-year-old unless you think you're likely to sign them. And so in and of itself, like I think he's at least going to get a pro deal here at some point, and then you sort of go from there.
I think I read he's committed to Quinnipiac to play there next year. I mean, is being 20 versus say a Zelensky or a Vandenberg, those guys are going to play college at 18. He's going at 20. Is the path expected to be different, or would you expect with a guy like that where he needs to stand out sooner maybe than those guys do?
He should look like a sophomore or a junior as a freshman, right? Like that should be the expectation, is that he's a 2 or 3 year player instead of a 3 or 4 year player. Because if he's a 4-year player, suddenly you're not a particularly
25.
You're not a particularly valuable commodity coming out at 24 or 25. So he needs to be good right away. He needs to take a step right away. He needs to be a top 6, top 9 player on Quinnipiac. Like he can't be one of those guys who's like a peripheral guy who plays 10 minutes as a freshman. Like he needs to be a 16, 17 minute a night forward for them right away. And maybe he doesn't need to have a point per game season or anything like that, but he needs to score 10 goals and have 20 points as a freshman and have a solid year in order to stay on track.
This may be a tough spot to crowbar in this conversation, but I'm thinking about it. And as we're describing Alex's chances at Quinnipiac, hockey is not a puck hoggy sport, right? Like it's rare that somebody who doesn't move the puck and who doesn't play a team game, you have to be incredibly, incredibly gifted. And if you're that late in the draft in third round through, chances are you're not. But I see kids coming to development camp, or I see kids at training camp, who are invitees, who are trying to make a name, trying to grab a spot. And so the pressure is to show out, right? Is to make yourself noticeable. And sometimes the only way to make yourself noticeable, the way you're describing, or at least the way I hear you describing, Alex would have to play at Quinnipiac. Sometimes you have to play an individual game more than a team game just to ensure that eyeballs are on you. And that may not be the best path forward for team success. Is that a challenge for a player in his spot in that, going into a college environment like that?
Yeah, there's pressure when your opportunity to sell a team on an entry-level contract downgrades from 4 years to 2 or 3 years, and frankly, you'd hope for 2 years. That there's pressure to perform. Like there's no question that there's pressure to be a good player, and Quinnipiac does play in a bit of a softer conference, and that helps. And they've got some talent there. Like I'm not guaranteeing it, but there's at least a chance that he spends some time with Ethan Wittenbach, or if he's on the power play, that he's playing with Ethan Wittenbach on the power play. Ethan Wittenbach led the country in scoring last year, a year ago, obviously. So there's opportunity there if he seizes it, and if he doesn't, it can go south on you real quick. So certainly there's that sort of there's a variation of outcomes for a player like that. Like you better hope that coaching staff really likes him and that they put him in a good position right away, because if they don't, his runway is going to shrink really, really quickly, right?
No more ECAC slander in this conversation. My poor ECAC. Always takes a beating. You've used, Scott, for a lot of guys the Kings have picked, a path. Like you can see the path if all goes right, like to get these players to the NHL. Kostov, to me, it's like the path feels like very easy to see because he already has he has the height.
Yep.
Seems like he's got some weight and seems like he could add more to the frame.
Definitely.
He's produced at the OHL, so he's got the attributes of like, okay, you can see this dude fitting into a bottom six. Like what is the path for Kostov if all goes well to where like, okay, you could see how this comes together?
The path is just that you have to produce at lower levels, even if that's not going to be your identity up level. So he still needs to go in at the college level and produce and be a guy who looks like an offensive guy there, even if that's not necessarily going to be his role in the NHL. I don't think anybody expects a 6th round pick to play in a top 6 in the NHL. But can he be a secondary complementary piece who scores a little bit and contributes a little bit? Is he AHL depth? That's what he has to find out, and it's a conclusion that the Kings will obviously have to come to over the next 2 or 3 years here, is sort of, okay, do we want to sign him to an entry-level contract? I do think that he will end up in a place where the answer is yes, or that if it's not an NHL contract, that it's an AHL contract. Like, I'd be surprised with what he's accomplished with his age, with what I think his college game will probably look like. Like, I'd be surprised if he doesn't play pro hockey. I don't think he's going to be a kid who plays 4 years of college hockey and then retires. Like, I don't think that's the path that Alex is on. The question is just, okay, is he going to be a middle 6 AHL guy? Can he be a third line NHL guy? Can he add maybe more of a hardness element to his game, more of a physical element to his game, so that a coach sees more than one opportunity in a lineup for him? Like, those are all the things that players in this range have to do. They either have to really lean in and pop so much offensively, like Ethan Wittenbach, who was a 5th round pick. Obviously, Alex is a 6th round pick, but Ethan was a 5th round pick who knew he wasn't going to be a bottom 6 guy. And so if you're a 5th round pick and you're not going to be a bottom 6 guy, you better score a ton, right? And so there are different ways to sort of go about it. He's not going to be the Ethan Wittenbach path where he goes and has 59 points as a freshman in college. But can he show the Kings that there's an identity there, that there's a potential role there is sort of what he has to do? Or will he be that sort of, you mentioned Madden and guys like Akil Thomas, guys who are good AHL players that have come through the organization over the years, but maybe haven't had that clear NHL identity, NHL role where a coach says, you're a penalty killer, or you're a checker, or you're a complimentary third line offensive guy. Like, you need to figure out what that looks like for you. And I think that's what Alex has to do at Quinnipiac. And then if beyond that in the AHL, like, this isn't a kid who's going to go NCAA directly into the NHL. Like, that's reserved for 1st and 2nd round picks or kids who are college free agents who win the Hobey Baker. Like, that's not the path that I think he's going to be on, but there is a path there for him to travel through the AHL and sort of establish himself.
If this were 30 years ago at his size, I'd be telling him to start wrapping his head around an enforcer role. Like, because it's a real easy way to claim a spot. All right, next on our list, taken in the 7th round, 209th overall. I can't believe this is the only player out of 11 that I've got nothing on, Scott, but this is the J.J. Abrams mystery box player for me. I can find one clip of one goal from this kid. I find no write-ups, no scouting reports. I talked to him at training camp, so I know one thing about him personally, or development camp, excuse me, not training camp. I got nothing on this kid.
If you pull up my honorable mentions for my top 100 piece, it's 30 reports, so it's kind of the 30 guys who just missed my list. You will find your Tobias Creston,
all right.
Creston report. He would have been in my top 130. He wasn't ranked by NHL Central Scouting. Was the only player who wasn't ranked by NHL Central Scouting that was in my top 130. So I saw something in him, especially at U18 Worlds, that was enough for me to go back and do tape. He played on a poor J20 team with HV71. Scored on that team and was a point per game player, and he's 6'1" and he can skate and he can shoot it. And typically with those attributes and a point per game at the J20 level, which is Sweden's top junior level, typically you're a mid-round pick. And yet he wasn't ranked by NHL Central Scouting. And I think part of it was just that NHL Central Scouting's list came out before U18 Worlds. Germany was a disappointment at this year's U18 Worlds, but Tobias Creston was their standout. He led their team in shots on goal. But I believe he was also like 1st or 2nd or 3rd in the entire tournament in shots on goal. I think he had like 30 plus shots, which is very hard to do on a team that had as little talent as he had around him. That means he was creating against opposing top lines for Canada and Finland and go down the list. That means he was creating his own looks as often a single fiddle player on his line kind of thing. But when I watched him at U18 Worlds, and I hadn't seen very much of him at all, there were other players on that HV71 team, but he'd never been a focus for me until U18 Worlds. And then I went back and watched a lot of tape, and when I saw him at U18 Worlds, I was like, this kid can skate. He's got a legit release. He seems to go and get pucks and be around pucks. Like, that's interesting to me. If you're 6'1" and you can skate and you're a good skater, like a plus level skater, and then you've got the release, if you can figure out the rest and you can look good on a German team where nobody looks good, that's something to me. And so that made him enough worthy of a mention for me. And I thought that he was a worthy late round pick, and I was happy that he was selected in the 7th round. Like, he was a kid that not a lot of people had on their list, and I decided to sort of not put on mine, but put at the peripherals of mine. And I was pleasantly surprised when he got picked. There's normally not a lot of kids who aren't ranked by NHL Central Scouting that get selected, but I thought he was worth it.
Unlike Jesse, I did know that you had him in your honorable mentions because I was looking when the Kings picked him. I was like, there is no information on this guy, but then I dove in because the Kings often do overage players. So I look at your overage thing. And then I was like, hey, he was in the honorable mentions. And it almost just feels like the Kings maybe had eyes on this guy that other teams didn't seem to almost have even on the radar. Like, I know that he attended, the Eisbären Berlin camp in Germany. The Kings own that team. So maybe there's a tie in there. It just feels like a guy who
that's an interesting point.
And so maybe they saw something there too. It just feels like one of those guys who was on no one's radar. Almost to me, it felt like an Atu Yamson type, where like when the Kings picked Atu Yamson a while back, I couldn't find the guy's hometown. Like, there was no information on him, but they found him, and he's kind of become like an AHL player out of nowhere.
Yep. And I think that's what you're hoping with Creston. The one thing, in speaking, and I know a couple of scouts who are based in Germany, and a couple of people around the German Hockey Federation, and speaking with a couple of people about him after U18 Worlds when he caught my eye, and I sort of flagged to them, hey, this kid looked interesting to me at the tournament. And I do think multiple NHL teams sort of took note of him, took stock of him at U18 Worlds, but it might have just been too late in the process for him to become a realistic part of their draft board conversation. But the one thing people did say to me is that he can kind of tunnel vision. Like, part of the reason he has 30 shots because he's always looking at the net. And there are sort of minor questions about the playmaking and the vision and how well he uses his line mates. But even still, like, as a 6'1", and I saw him around the rink a couple times. Like, he's built well. And then he's got it. Like, if you see him in practice and see him in games, like, there's some pop off the blade when he shoots it, and that makes a player interesting to me in that range.
If he attended Eisbären camp, let's just say theoretically he were to wind up playing for the Eisbären, would that be we just don't know the paths that lead through the European leagues,
Yeah.
Would that be a better path for him than staying where he is at HV71?
HV71. I would probably argue no. Like, if you can establish yourself in the SHL, that's a better path than establishing yourself in the DEL in terms of making the jump over here, playing with better players. I don't believe he's signed, though, with HV71 for next year. I don't know whether they have him signed, so I don't exactly know what his plan is for next season. But certainly, like, if you were to poll NHL scouts, they would tell you that the SHL is the preferred path. But there are a lot of kids coming out of the DEL. Not a lot of kids. There are enough kids coming out of Germany and through the DEL path, and the DEL is a very respectable pro league over there.
All right, that brings us to the final player taken by the Kings, and this is another pick that sort of fascinates me. I'm not sure that I'm fascinated more by the circumstances than by the player. It's Lucas Ambrosio, taken 233rd overall. 6'4", 190 pounds, so he's big. He's a left shot defenseman. It's his first year eligible in the draft. The reason he is interesting to me is that the Kings traded into the spot. I don't remember where we were in the 7th round when the trade happened, but there were 10 or 13 picks left in the 7th round. And the Kings went ahead and traded into 233, which is the second to last pick of the draft.
Yep.
So it almost feels like, okay, there's no guarantee that he would have gone in the 233rd or 234th spot at all. My assumption, not having spoken to anybody from the Kings about this, we haven't talked to Mark Yannetti or not yet, but like my guess would be in that situation, you wanted to invite him to camp, but that another team had also invited him to camp. And so the best way to lock down the chances of getting that kid into camp is to draft him. And if it only costs you a 7th rounder in next year, then that's fine. What do we know about Lucas Ambrosio? You know, he was at the draft, so good for the kid. He gets to go and do the thing. But why at 220 in the draft trade into 233?
Well, I think you're just counting on him becoming organizational depth for you. Like, he's the kind of kid who is a quote unquote high floor, low ceiling type. Because of his size and because of the way he moves, he's got decent mobility. He's competitive and he's physical and he defends hard, and he's been a part of hockey. Like, not a lot of kids who've been a part of Hockey Canada who are 7th round picks. Like, he's been a part of the U18 team with Hockey Canada, and he's been he was a good player for the Erie Otters this year, and then he's big. And when you're big and you're athletic, that's sometimes enough to be a pick. And I thought he was another kid. Like, I didn't. But not a single one, frankly, of their 11 picks had me shaking my head, and that's pretty rare. Even when I really like a draft class, there are typically 2 or 3 picks that a team makes where I'll go, I don't like the value here. I don't like the bet at this range, or even if I like the player, sometimes I don't love where they were taken. I didn't really get that feeling with any of the Kings' players in this class, and Ambrosio was another one of them. Again, he wasn't on my list. He wasn't even in my honorable mentions, but he's a kid that I've seen play a fair amount in the OHL and a little bit with Hockey Canada, and he's 6'4", and he can move, and he's physical, and maybe he just becomes a third pairing AHL guy, but a third pairing AHL guy in a 7th round pick is great value. I think he was just a worthy pick, and they felt he was a worthy pick, and they probably felt he was going to be a more worthy pick than what their 7th rounder a year from now looked like. And if they had him in the 5th or 6th round as a potential option, and then he was still there at the end of the draft, then you take him, and it's no sweat off your back losing next year's 7th.
Scott, I've kind of detected a theme with some of these guys, which is the skating size combination. Bigger guys who can also skate, or at least skate well for their size. I don't necessarily watch games with a scouting eye, so I often see skating more in an offensive sense. When you have, say, an Ambrosio or a Golger or a Pantelis, like guys who have the size, like how does that skating maybe apply to defending for players like that?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, that's look around the league at the teams that go deep in the Stanley Cup playoffs these days, right? Like, all 6 guys are typically big. You might have that premium Quinn Hughes or Cale Makar who's in the mix, but by and large, NHL blue lines over the last 5 or 6 years have been built around 6'3" guys who are mobile, right? Like, that's the look of an NHL defenseman right now. And you've got your Hudsons and your Hugheses and your Makars, and there are exceptions to that. And there are even there's the odd third pairing guy, the Emil Andres, and the odd sort of smaller third pairing guy. But there's only 2 power play roles, and then you just want guys at 5-on-5 who can swallow up the ice and fill space and are hard to get around and cover ground. And that's what you can do when you're 6'3" or 6'4" and you can skate. Now, Ambrosio doesn't skate as well as Svensk, certainly, or even Golyer or Pantelis, but he's not heavy. I wouldn't say he's a heavy skating in mud 6'4" player either. And you see him around the rink, and he looks like an athlete in a way that a lot of these kids don't. So those are the little bets that you make at the end of a draft.
One of his strengths is speedy skating. Would you define him as a speedy skater?
I wouldn't define him as a speedy skater. Like, Verti Svensk is a speedy skater. I wouldn't qualify Ambrosio as that, but he moves well, and he moves athletically, and that in a 7th round pick is already a good starting point.
All right. Well, we have gone through 11 picks, Scott Wheeler. We appreciate your time. Before we let you go, you've alluded to it plenty of times during this, run through of all 11 picks, but I guess I'm just going to ask you once again to sort of sum up. Sounds like, I know letter grades for drafts are sort of silly, but it sounds like you're giving the Kings at least an A.
Yeah, my colleague Corey Pronman does grades, and I do winners and losers, and that's how we break it up to do basically the same content with two different names. I don't love categorizing teams as losers on draft night, so that sure. I always find that it's a little harsh by default, and I'm always very open when teams get grumpy with me about those labels on draft night, and I try to explain to people that that's just the way that we have to title these things. But they were one of my winners, and if I were doing grades, I'd have probably given them an A or an A minus, maybe not an A plus, but I liked every single one of their picks, and that's not something I normally say. Ribkin was maybe the only one, like Ribkin wasn't in my top 100, and he was obviously taken in the top 100, but if you like a goalie and you take him in the third round, I'll never be too critical of that selection. And when you're 6'7", I understand the bet. So Ribkin was maybe the only one who was out of place relative to my list, but all the other guys, like, they took Golier and Lefebvre. Lefebvre was maybe a little higher than where I had him slotted, but Lefebvre was kind of right in the range. Golier was right in the range. Vandenberg and Svensk and Kotsov and Creston were all actually taken lower than where I have them, which is obviously, if I'm just measuring it against my list, I view that as a huge positive. Vandenberg too. So Hermanson too. Like I had Hermanson 15, they get him 19. So yeah, I liked it. I thought they prioritized skill at the top, which is what I think you have to do if you were operating from where the Kings were with their pool. I think that first round pick had to be a skill guy, and then I think from the other 10 picks after that, they might have a few guys who play NHL games, and that's huge.
Any dark horse favorites for guys that may have careers that you wouldn't expect?
Well, I think Creston's the one. Like if Creston even plays a single NHL game, or is even a second line AHLer for you long term as a 200 and whatever pick who wasn't ranked by NHL Central Scouting, like that's a sign that your scouting department's doing a good job. So Creston's one that I'll be watching closely here moving forward, because it could just be fun if he has some success, even if it's unlikely.
Excellent. Well, Scott Wheeler, thank you so much for your time as always. We really appreciate it. And thanks for watching, Kings fans. We'll talk to you soon.